My name is Taylor Coyne, joining you from Los Angeles.
And my name is James Cook, coming you live from Indiana. Both Taylor and I research retail and real estate for JLL.
And this is everything we know about retail.
And this is also where we buy. That's right, Taylor. This is a crossover show. Fans of everything we know about retail, join us live on video every week at everythingweknow.show. So that's where we're at if you're watching us live right now. And they come to learn everything we know about retail, 3 things at a time.
And Where We Buy listeners come every week to hear in-depth interviews with retail movers and shakers on Apple, Spotify, or at wherewebuy.show. So welcome to the first crossover show. And let's kick it off. So James, tell me, what do you know about retail this week?
Well, this week, Taylor, we're talking about how retailers can turn stores into fulfillment centers for last mile delivery. So now more than ever, thanks to the pandemic, people want to get their stuff fast and easy and convenient. And the question for retailers is delivering it from the retail store the right solution? So we got an expert. We're being joined by an expert. There he is, Geno Coradini. Welcome, Geno.
Hey, James, Taylor, how y'all doing?
Awesome. So Geno is our coworker at JLL. He works with many national retailers solving their real estate problems. So Geno, normally on this show, we tell everybody 3 things we know about retail, but today we're going to ask you for 3 things that you know about last mile fulfillment. Are you ready to go?
Let's go.
All right, let's do it. Taylor, Taylor, you can take it off.
Fantastic. All right. So the first question of the day is, Geno, what is last mile fulfillment?
Very simply put, it's the last leg of the journey. It's getting the products to the consumers, plain and simple.
And as we know, we want things fast and right now.
I do. I certainly do.
That's exactly right.
Especially after the pandemic. So, all right, we're reading a lot about this, and that's what it means. But what retailers are actually doing this in practice right now?
There's quite a few, and it seems like it's being led by the big boxes, the Targets, the Walmarts, the Best Buy, the Bed Bath & Beyond, Kroger's. And what you're seeing out there is retailers are essentially converting a portion of what would otherwise be sales area to what is more commonly known as a stock room or receiving area, to stage products to ultimately pack and ship or to be picked up in store.
It's the pickup in store again. This is the theme of all of these shows and podcasts, especially since the pandemic. It's about convenience, right? So we have that Best Buy's digital sales grew by 144% in 2020. And 2/3 of all of those digital sales were buy online, pickups in store, curbside, and ship from store. So clearly there's a demand from this consumer. So why, the average consumer probably isn't thinking about last mile, but why do they want their retailers to be thinking about last mile?
I think a lot of it is instant gratification. Like many of us, we buy things online, and I'm probably no different than many of you that when you're buying something online, it says your order will be delivered today. And you're like, oh, that's even better. Or it'll be tomorrow. And that's great. And I think there's some element if it says, oh, it's 2 weeks from now and within a 5-day range, I sometimes get buyer's remorse and I might change my mind if it's not here tomorrow.
Yeah, that definitely happens. And I don't know, I feel like this is a millennial meme, but it's always like, you spend 5 hours online shopping and then it says, but I have to pay for, $6.99 for delivery and I'm not going to get it for 2 weeks. And then you abandon all of that time spent. So yeah, I think instant gratification is, another theme that, all of us consumers want. So that makes a lot of sense. But so if they're converting all of these retail stores, right, how does that actually work? Are they still functioning as stores? They're just taking a portion of it. Where do they get that space to reconfigure for this kind of really new operation?
It's tough, and it varies from one retailer to the next. If you look at some of the big boxes that I mentioned, and they're converting sales area to receiving area, it might seem a little easier, but it's not necessarily, because if you have consumers that are buying products online to be picked up in the store, it all of a sudden changes your entire inventory management system. And I was in a home improvement store just this past weekend, and there was products scattered all down the aisles waiting for customers to pick it up. Because think about it, you order it online and they're happy to get the merchandise at the store, but they're even more pleased when the customer actually picks it up when it gets in the store, because that store is not schematically laid out for all of these products coming in randomly as consumers order them. So it's a big challenge.
To be fair, I'm not part of this problem, because at least for a home improvement store, I'm probably not ordering the bulk things, but I can imagine, I've definitely been one of those people who says, your pickup window's running out. Do you want to extend? We'll hold your items for 3 more days. And I'll say, yes, I do want you to do that for me. But I can imagine for a home improvement store, if it's someone who's building a house, who's a contractor, who has a ton of big items, who's just leaving it in the store, that's a big problem for a lot of these retailers, a challenge perhaps that no one expected.
Well, it absolutely is. And I think one thing that also is a challenge for retailers is the fact that they're paying retail rent, which traditionally has been much greater than that of industrial warehouse space rent, but it's acting as a warehouse in a retail environment. And in some instances, you might say a retailer scratching their head saying, we're already committed for the next several years at this rental rate. Send the product. Let's make it convenient for the customers. And so I think what we're seeing now is more reactive, but I think as this whole evolution of e-commerce and buy online, pick up in store, all these different avenues, I believe what we're going to see in the future is a more organized approach. And it's probably a balance between retail space being used as warehouse and last mile and traditional warehouse space. I think there has to be a balance.
That makes perfect sense. That leads us into, wait for it, our second question for Geno. Geno, I want to get a little bit more into the details on the challenges. So my first question is, I think about all the different types of retail that's out there, and some of it's real commodity stuff. That's the kind of stuff that probably lends itself most to last mile, would you say? It is easier to do than, I would say groceries probably the most difficult, would you say?
Yeah, I think you're going to see groceries continuing to deal with buy online, pick up in store, or curbside more commonly. But some of the challenges that even that presents is now you have an internal shopper, right? So you just increase labor because the consumer is not the one pushing the buggy up and down the aisle. You're paying someone to do it. And then you've got to convert the exterior to have a pickup location. So they're investing in signage, they're blocking parking. The center wasn't necessarily developed for that type of use. And I keep going back to the cost of retail space versus warehouse space. And I think a segment that I'm all too familiar with, and that's the auto parts space. And when I look at the auto parts space, the AutoZones, the O'Reillys, the Advanced Auto Parts, paying retail rent in fantastic retail location, and I look at today's vehicles, and they're becoming much more complex to repair. Therefore, many car owners are taking their cars to the mechanic and not going into do it yourself. They're going into the mechanic, and ultimately these retail locations are driving auto parts to the mechanic. So is it really necessary that you be at a signalized intersection with plenty of parking and high traffic, high visibility, if the mechanic's calling you to say, hey, I need a battery for this car, can you bring it to me? So it's a big challenge, and retailers, I think, going to really be working on figuring this out in the future as to how best to utilize this expensive retail real estate. And we talked about it from the big boxes that are really taking hold around this. I oftentimes wonder in the smaller shop space, take for example, a GameStop. GameStop has been a very popular topic in the news lately for many reasons, but as they have shuttered several stores across the country over the last several months and even over a year, you can ask yourself, does it make sense for even a small box that's maybe a couple thousand square feet, give or take, can they convert a portion of that space to last mile? Can they invest in a delivery solution so when someone does buy online, they can actually drive those games to their customers, or the customers can come into the store? And it poses a whole other challenge because many times the permitted use in a retailer's lease doesn't allow for that. They're required to operate a certain percentage of the sales floor for the consumer, for the customers to come in. And when you think about, if you're a neighbor, I'm not talking about GameStop necessarily, but if you're a neighboring retailer and you look at what used to be open to the public, come in and shop us beautiful things in the windows, and now it's kind of a warehouse and they've papered up the glass on front because nobody needs to go in it, you all of a sudden lose that synergy that once existed in cross shopping. So I think there's going to be another challenge out there that's going to rear its head in the not too distant future. And I think landlords are going to be challenged with the restrictions that they have in place on shopping centers and how to best manage those and enforce them.
Geno, are there zoning restrictions as well that might prohibit some of this stuff?
Yeah, there absolutely are. And if you look at it on a bigger scale, if you think about taking a grocery anchored shopping center, or what was a grocery anchored shopping center with several other small shops next to it, and you're going to convert that to a distribution center of sorts, you can't just flip a switch. We've talked about that in the past. You can't just flip a switch because the zoning may not allow for that. And frankly, the local municipality may not be a big fan of it becoming a warehouse space versus a retail space, because the fact that that space is no longer selling products and services, all those sales tax dollars just left. No more sales tax dollars. Now, on a bigger, grander warehouse distribution property, you might be able to say, well, we're bringing in hundreds of employees, and therefore we are going to see payroll tax dollars. We're going to see more spend in the community. So that's a lot of different things to consider as municipalities, landlords, and retailers alike figure out this new puzzle. And it impacts each one a little differently.
And I guess if you do ship from store, depending on how you do it, you might have delivery vans coming in and out. And so that's added truck traffic too.
Exactly. And, oftentimes when a new development is being considered, you have what you call impact fees. If you have stacking in terms of traffic, if the traffic is so much greater because of this use, you have signalized intersections that can be or may need to be modified. So there's a lot of different things that come into play when you're looking at converting these properties.
I want to remind everybody out there who's watching us live, if you're on YouTube and you're signed into your YouTube account, you can type in live questions, and we're going to be answering questions for Geno in just a little bit. Geno said he's ready for anything, so just go for it, people. But before we do that, Taylor, what do we have next?
Oh, fantastic. All right. This is going into the third question that we have for Geno. So obviously, all of this is not without its challenges, but retailers are doing it. What retailer in your mind is doing it well?
There's a lot out there, but one that is kind of fresh on my mind, and one of our newest clients, which I'm thrilled to be a partner with, is a company called GoPuff. And the name doesn't necessarily suggest That's right. GoPuff.
Wait, hold on. I'm gonna pull up the website while you talk because
Yeah,
I
sure.
had not really heard of GoPuff. Here's the website, but keep talking, Geno.
We should have taken a poll. What does GoPuff sell before actually bringing it up and just seeing what the general public had, thought of. But
Right. All of our favorites: beer and ice cream and wine and cookies and chips. Think about anything that you could really buy, and I'll just use the example of a liquor store, a convenience store. In a convenience store, it's a variety of products. And to be able to go online, as you see here, and use the GoPuff app to then have product shipped to your house within minutes of ordering it, it's pretty cool. I can only imagine having something like this when I was in college and I wanted, chips and perhaps an adult beverage.
You would have never left your dorm room.
That's exactly right. And you know what is even more exciting? They're expanding very aggressively. I just read recently that they spent over $300 million buying a company called Bevmo, which is a beer, wine, and spirits operator, a chain of them on the West Coast. And if you think about the strategic play that GoPuff made there, it's pretty impressive. It literally put dozens of stores, so created points of access in these markets overnight. It also enabled them to have liquor licenses, which are often tough to come by. And so if you think they can use those stores to then leverage the GoPuff app, they can start delivering that same product just as they would in a traditional GoPuff location. And some of the GoPuff locations, it's a really interesting model, are not open to the public. There's no need for a consumer to necessarily come into those stores. If you order it on the app, it acts as a warehouse space.
Where do you have any idea of, the existing GoPuff locations? I mean, are there physical locations? Yes, they're operating as a warehouse, but is it also a marketing, ploy too, that you're driving down and you see GoPuff? Like, I'm assuming it's probably not on the main street, corner of Main and Main, but maybe a few blocks away, cheaper rent, but also get that marketing aspect of it also.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it looks as though, from what I can tell in their locations scattered throughout the country, that it's not always about visibility at all. It's about being close to the consumer to deliver a product in a limited amount of time. So it's points of access, and they're continuing to penetrate, from what I can see, as I travel the country, to create more and more points of access. They've also raised just over $1 billion in total to fund their new store growth. I think they're onto something.
Definitely. And here in LA, Bevmos are all over the place too. So, and in great locations. So one, just again, access of delivery, but two, I don't know. I'm always thinking about brand awareness and what some of these newer retailers that maybe, the average consumer isn't aware of yet. I think it's a great move.
Yeah, that's really cool. So not specifically them, but let's just take any, retailer that's got a national footprint and says, we want to start doing fulfillment from the store. Do you have a sense of like how much space they have to carve off and in order to make it worthwhile?
It differs from one retailer to the next. I think in some instances, when I look at home furnishings, for example, and big bulky items, I think that brings up a totally different dynamic than a bag of chips and a 6-pack of Coke from GoPuff, right? You've got really much greater delivery challenges, frankly. That's not to say, there's plenty of home furnishing stores that sell product online, but typically they're not dropping, a bed off at your front door. It has to be a little bit more orchestrated and organized. So I don't foresee some bulkier item type retailers really having to convert part of their stores necessarily for fulfillment because it's not, James, as you mentioned earlier, a commodity necessarily that people are buying each day over and over and over.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think it's time to get into our items for discussion. This week's items for discussion. Geno, you loving my animated titles? Taylor knows I have fun with my titles. We've got some questions that have come in. So I'll start with one. Okay, so this is interesting. If a landlord refuses to amend or restructure the current lease, are there other options? If so, will the CCNR and or REA dictate what those options are? Gino, what do you think?
There's always options. There's always option. There's this misconception that when retailers sign a lease, that it can never be renegotiated, which is far from the truth. And just like with restructuring, for example, for the sake of driving down your occupancy costs, or negotiating with a landlord for capital contributions for things like remodels, it depends based on the retailer. If that landlord says, hey, you're a critical part of our center, it also makes a point, or it depends on whether or not you have a high vacancy within the shopping center. Landlord's going to be much more open to accommodating your request to convert your stores. It also depends perhaps on when your lease is expiring. If your lease is up in 6 months, you always have the option to say, we're getting out of here because this landlord down the street is much more accommodating. Where do I send the keys?
All right, so here's another one. Now I'm going to pull this one up because this one was from a YouTube viewer. Madison says, are there any key characteristics of prime building for hybrid retail stores besides being in a last mile location, meaning a good place to deliver from?
You know, just like with any retailer, you want to be near the rooftops. You want to be near your customer, and
Right.
It's going to be a balance. So Madison, when you say hybrid, I think rooftops, and I think we don't want to be at the corner of Main and First. We want to be near the rooftops, but just off of Main and First, so we're not paying that Main and First rent.
That makes perfect sense. All right, here's another question that we were emailed in. Have tenants been receptive to their neighbors closing shop in favor of opening fulfillment-only spaces, or does it require a balance with continued open store hours? So what that says to me is how do people feel when your next door neighbor becomes a dark store?
You know, we touched on this a little bit. There are many retailers out there that rely on that synergy. And when you take that away, it really starts to change the perception of the center from not only the retail operator, but also the consumer. Consumers typically want to go where there's activity, there's people moving about, there's new product on the sidewalk, not a van at the front door loading up to deliver product to a customer.
Awesome. Here's another live question that just came in. Could a 2,000 square foot restaurant possibly convert into a small fresh food convenience store? Oh, interesting. What do you think, Gino?
Wow, that is an interesting question. I can't say that I know the answer other than to say this. I think anything is possible in today's environment.
Yeah, I mean, that one is theoretically, of course, really depends on what it is, where it is, the neighborhood, but potentially yes. To answer your question, Cervantes. Okay, Taylor, what else do we have? Do we have other questions?
We do. So one question is, so what technology, and think kind of user-friendly and engaging apps, what kind of solutions are you putting in place to enhance this kind of potential last mile fulfillment locations? An example was, some of those pickup boxes or, lockers for things that you place online and you go and pick up and, so how, what technology are we seeing, and are we going to see more of that?
You know what? I actually have an interesting thought about this one, Gino. Do you mind if I jump in?
Go right ahead.
Okay. So we're kind of the real estate researchers, so we don't get as much into the technology side, but I talked to Fleet Feet, the running shoe retailer, who has some really great technology that handles all of the heavy lifting on the fulfillment process. They've got a store on Amazon's marketplace. So they're like a third-party vendor on Amazon, and people will go in and order a pair of shoes, and their behind the scenes software, and I don't know the name of what it is, but it's a third party software, will then figure out which one of their retail stores is closest to the person who ordered it. And they'll send, and these are franchise stores, most of them. So the franchisees get this benefit. Then they just get this order that they fulfill, and basically the store gets that sale that was made on Amazon. I think it's a perfect hybrid model. It's really cool. So there's some great technology out there. So Taylor, let's see. I'm just checking to see if we have. We do have one comment from a gentleman named Joe who says, "Go Geno." That guy looks familiar. I don't know if do we know Joe?
Yeah.
But Taylor, we're running out of time. We do have some more questions, but I don't think we're going to have time to answer them today. So I think what we're going to do is, if we didn't get to your question, we have, for people who submitted them via email, we've got your email address, and we can follow up with you. And we're going to be doing, this is just the first of a series of these that we're doing about industrial and retail worlds combining. So we're going to be digging into this a lot deeper in the future. We're doing, I just want to mention to everybody, I talked about Fleet Feet just now. We just did a podcast with them that is totally worth checking out. It's all about the new technology that they're using. Our podcast is called Where We Buy, and it's at wherewebuy.show. And you can also find it on Spotify or whatever podcast app you listen to. Just search for Where We Buy.
And then, of course, hit the subscribe button in YouTube to keep up with everything we know that comes out weekly. And you can click on that little bell icon, too, so you're notified when a new show comes out, so you won't miss a thing. We'll have a new episode next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. Also, 1:30 in the morning in Alice Springs, Northern Territory, Australia, I believe. So all of those listeners, thank you so much for staying up so late to get all of your latest and greatest retail trends. And you can also check out older shows at everythingweknow.show.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, today's show is part of a whole mini-series that we're doing. So the next one in the series is going to be on April 22nd, 1 p.m. Central. The title is Can We Convert Retail to Industrial? So this is it feasible to take your retail property and make industrial out of it? So I think that's going to be a great one. But Taylor, what else do you know about retail?
James, I'll tell you all of it next week.